hope that as we look back 10 years from now, we will say that React played a really important part in ensuring that the web stays relevant for forever. We have glasses and headsets and phones and all these other things, but if every time we have new devices, we have to invent new platforms and rebuild everything and rethink everything from scratch, I think that's worse for the world. So I hope that Vercel will play a small part in ensuring that the web wins, and that in 10 years we will sort of thank React, frameworks like Next.js, and companies like Vercel for propelling the web forward and ensuring that it doesn't become obsoleted by proprietary closed platforms.
Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of the Leadership Exchange podcast. My name's Tracy. You can follow me on LinkedIn at Tracy S. Lee or on X at Lady Leet. I'm here today with Tom O, who's the Chief Product Officer of Vercel. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Tracy. Great to chat.
I know. We've known each other for so many years.
Many years.
Yes. When was the first React Conf that I went to? It had to have been 2015 or 2016, somewhere around there.
Yeah, let's see. I think the first one we did was 2015. It was really small. We did it in the cafe on Facebook campus. That might have been the first one you were at.
Yes.
Then we
That was
did a
not
little
the
bit
first
bigger
one.
in San Francisco the next year, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so it's been a while, and it's crazy because 2025 now, so it's been about 10 years. Oh my gosh.
It's been a great
And you've done so many cool things. I feel like there's a lot of visible faces in the React community, and I feel like people who are really deep into the React community know of you. But people who maybe aren't as familiar, probably know Dan Abramov, for example. I feel like
Yeah.
when it comes to React. But you're really, you ran the React team and a lot of stuff at Meta for so long. Tell us a little bit about just kind of like what you did previously, what you do now, and then we can dig into some more questions.
Sounds good. Yeah. I joined Facebook still in the early days. Facebook was about the size that Vercel is now when I joined. And I was a software engineer to start. A few years in, I transitioned into engineering management, but I focused on a lot of our JavaScript infrastructure. So I actually created and led a team called JavaScript Infrastructure, which was part of a broader team called Product Infrastructure. We built the frameworks and tools that developers would use in order to build user-facing products and internal-facing products as well, increasingly. I created this very small team that Jordan Walk ended up joining to build out some of our JavaScript infrastructure, things like testing tools and compilers and things like that. And Jordan had been kind of working in ads for a while, and he had this new idea, and they were like, "Well, let's go see if Tomo's team is interested in exploring this." And that's you can read all about or hear all about the stories online, but what he was building would eventually become React. So we then created a sub-team inside of JavaScript infrastructure. We created the React core team. It was very small for a long time, but we started working on it full time. Then eventually we transitioned the React team into the React org because we had a family of technologies that cropped up around React. And then, fast forward many, many years. These days I'm at Vercel and I lead all of engineering, product, and design. It's much more than frameworks and developer tools now. We also have our customer-facing products as well as our entire managed infrastructure service, as well as, the company is responsible for tools like V0.
Yeah, that's definitely it's definitely fun. I think I got into JavaScript around 2014, 2015, and this was when, ES 2015 was coming out, and I started with Ember actually, and I remember Ember, React, Angular, and you had the framework wars, and it's kind of cool to see how, I don't know if in the beginning, I feel like it was sort of like three horses sort of running together, and then all of a sudden React just sort of went crazy, and React was clearly the winner if you had to choose a winner. And then I love the transition from that and React being not opinionated, right, and sort of how the React ecosystem formed around that. I think that there was a lot of opportunities actually because React decided not to be opinionated, for an ecosystem to grow. And then so now you take that and then you transition that over to your position at Vercel, and of course, now everybody's like, yeah, with React, you should be using a framework like Vercel or like Next.js, for example. And
Yeah.
it's great that that kind of like all falls under the Vercel umbrella. So I feel like all the fun stuff that's happening in the ecosystem these days is all under Vercel. But
I think so. Yeah, we're doing a lot of great stuff, and it's beyond even React. But I remember those
yes.
early days as well. I was such a huge fan of Ember to this day.
Mhm.
Like good friends with Tom Dale, one of the
Mhm.
co-creators of Ember. The Angular team too. The things that I liked about those frameworks was that they were so opinionated,
Mhm.
because they didn't make you well, try this out and try that out and maybe do it this way. They just said here's kind of the right way to do it.
Mhm.
The sort of opportunity or the problem with that approach, I think, ultimately was that you had to kind of be starting something greenfield, starting something brand new. So one of the reasons I think React took off in the early days is because practically speaking, we didn't ever start anything new at Facebook. We had all this, what we call brownfield, like existing code. So we just needed tons of escape hatches for React. And like, I think that we created kind of two types of escape hatches. One was you could use React on part of an existing page, regardless of what the outer framework or strategy was for it. And two was from within React, like let's say your whole page is React. From within React, you could embed at the time, like a jQuery widget or like a little MVC app. Like you could embed you wouldn't want to do this, but you could embed an Ember app inside of a React app. And because we had that interop story, we had these like little escape hatches that let you just kind of try it out in certain places. It became much easier to incrementally adopt React than it did some of the other more opinionated, more full-featured frameworks. So I'd argue that React, the reason that it became so big is because of incremental adoption. But over time, what happened is as more and more people were using "quote unquote" wall-to-wall React, right? And there's just the entire app is React. Um, they wanted more and more opinionation about how to do things. So they wanted something that you could start with incrementally, just a little at a time, but over time they're like, well, now we want you to answer all these questions that Angular and Ember figured out, from the beginning.
Yeah.
So we've always been kind of, the React team was always influenced by those other frameworks. People used to ask me like, what do you think of these competing frameworks? It's like, I don't compete. React doesn't compete with other frameworks. We learn from each other. And this is kind of like, I think it's always been the ethos of the team is like, a rising tide lifts all boats. We're all innovating together. And
Yeah.
maybe that's one of the other reasons that React took off, because it was like, never at any point in React's history did anyone ever say, you should use React, it's amazing, from the core team. We said, hey, here's a problem we had, and this is how we solved it. Try it out. Let us know if it works for you. So I'm kind of proud of that.
Yeah. I think the best part about being in Silicon Valley is you get to be part of that ecosystem that's built, right? That thing that sort of impacts everything, and everything you touch. So, for first all the stuff over at Meta, and then now at Vercel is kind of cool. So when you look back on your time leading the React team, what are you most proud of? Maybe not in terms of technology, but in terms of the culture or leadership style you built.
Yeah, it's a little bit of what I was talking about here. I mean, the thing that I'm most proud of was the org that I built. Our team became this place inside of Facebook where everybody kind of wanted to graduate to our team.
I
It
love
was like,
that.
yeah, we very rarely hired from the outside. I mean, there's a few notable exceptions. I think Sophie Alpert was one of the first people we hired from the open source community. Dan Abramov later, and Andrew Clark from like Redux fame. We had hired from the community to the React core team. But my org in general, the React org, we really didn't do much hiring from the outside. We basically would have folks internally that were really interested in coming to our team to solve problems that they experienced or opportunities that they experienced from their past teams. So you'd have folks joining us to work on the frameworks that they were using in their past roles. And so we just created this really awesome team of people who are really experienced, really in it with customers, so whoever's using the technologies. And it was a really good culture. We cared about all of the usage. We cared about building great things. And we really loved talking about our work and sharing things with the community. So I'm most proud of, if I look back on that time, I'm most proud of the team that I built in the React org. I'm second most proud of the tone with which we kind of I think we kind of shifted the narrative. Like open source used to be kind of arrogant and a little cringy. it's like, behold, we've solved the internet again. And like anything around, and I hate to call it like web components, but it was just like, no, like you have to do it this way. And it's like, it just made you feel bad. Like certain types of technology were like, it was kind of just a little bit more in your face and like salesy and like arrogant. And I'm really, really proud of the like tone that we set and the like welcoming nature and how proud everybody was of, helping each other and lifting each other up. So it wasn't just a framework.
Yeah, yeah. I still remember going to my first React conference, and it was so different. Again, being involved in the different communities. Ember, I don't know if I had a strong opinion about what the Ember community was in terms of vibe, but I definitely felt like when I went to an Angular conference, it was a bunch of I don't know, it was like a bunch of dads, and I felt, very welcome. And I'm like, oh, this is so nice, everyone's family, and whatever. And I really felt welcome to that community. And when I went to the my first React Conf, I was like, wow, everybody's really sort of like design forward. It felt like people had, I don't know, like standards for themselves, I suppose, in terms of, design and user experience and whatever. And that sort of ripples, ripples into everything else, which is it's pretty cool. So if anybody hasn't gone to like different types of conferences before and met different communities, it's definitely something fun. As React was growing, right, as you said, it started off pretty small and started off as sort of like a smaller project, but then all of a sudden you're making decisions that affect millions of developers. How did you balance making those decisions? And in your role, how involved were you?
Yeah, I mean, especially when I was directly leading the React core team and everybody reported to me, I think as this thing started to take off, we had to balance like the things that people are asking for with the direction that we need to, we feel we need to take the framework in order to achieve its like next, whatever the next level of greatness or opportunity was, or the next set of common problems and foot guns that people were facing.
Mhm.
I was very involved in the early days. I mean, I remember I used to push the team whenever they would come up with a new feature. I would say, like, there's a cost associated with every feature, every API. And so if you instrument or if you add something new, you should be thinking about, well, what does it replace conceptually? There's a story about, when the team wanted to add get derived state from props, which was I loved the literal nature of these like lifecycle methods at the time. I was like, okay, like what 2 or 3 methods are you replacing now that you have this functionality? And they're like, well, actually, we dug into our use of all of these other methods in the code base, and we're able to remove. So most people won't need to learn these 3 other APIs. It was like component should update and like, all these other things. And what I was push the team on always was simplifying. So as you think about, trying to affect the next million developers, it's not just about adding new features that support new use cases. Every new feature is a liability. It's a gift and a curse, right? Yes, you can do more things, but now I have more to learn as a newcomer to the framework. So I always really push the team on simplifying and finding the more beautiful abstraction that would capture more use cases, but give me fewer things to learn as a developer. I think that really, really helped. But the other thing was we just anchored ourselves in real problems that real people using the technologies were having. I didn't say that, I never felt like the success of the team or the success of the framework could be measured exclusively by number of downloads or number of developers or number of anything. And instead, our success was the success of the people who used the technology. So I would say, you're going to go embed yourself with this ads manager team. And the framework is not successful unless the ads manager team is successful. And this was kind of foreign for a framework team at the time because they're like, well, we can support thousands of use cases. Why should we only anchor on one? And it was because at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is the value, the impact of the people who use the thing, not the framework. Anybody can write a bunch of code and put it in a GitHub repo. It's the things that we build with the thing. So we were very anchored on real customer use cases. And that meant we couldn't please everybody. Historically had like the most highest number of GitHub issues open with feature requests, and the team had to just say, no, like we're focused on these things that help these folks. If those don't work for you, no sweat. You don't have to use React, we're fine. But we really had to balance the kind of like idea that you could add net new stuff with the liability or cost associated with adding so much more surface area.
Yeah, that's definitely so grounding because I mean, even as you see other products and brands, right, growing that maybe aren't even technology focused, right? Like there is that balance of, okay, what am I hyper focused on? And I think that hyper focus that React has always had has really contributed to the success of the framework. You called it a framework. I remember back in the day, right? React's not a framework, and gosh, it's going back to 10 years of Twitter drama. I feel like.
Yep. Yeah,
So
frameworks at the time I think were more opinionated than React was. React with these escape hatches was like, well, you kind of need to use it inside of a different framework or a different
yeah,
strategy, and so we called
yeah,
it a library.
yeah,
A library for rendering user interfaces, I think. But yeah, eventually I think it took on more responsibilities, and I think really using React, a library with a framework around it, is probably the best way to do it because it does
yeah,
provide some low level primitives, but you got to
yeah,
hold them very right, and it's easier to do with a framework.
yeah, yeah. I always love a framework. Again, coming from Ember, right? I'm like, I still remember learning JavaScript and being like, my first few days, and I had this boyfriend that knew JavaScript, and I remember he was like, "Ah, should I show you a framework? Should I not?" And 10 days in, he showed me Ember, and I said, "Oh my gosh, this is so amazing!" But
So
it
good.
really shaped how I learned JavaScript, and we could go on and on and on about that. But I want to talk
Absolutely.
about your transition to Vercel, and
Sure.
so again, I love that just like hearing about how you were able to sort of hyper focus on the customer, even with React and open source project, right? Is so important. I feel like a lot of developers, you know, we're all artists, right? Um, so there's so many amazing and fun things to focus on and do and everything like that. And sometimes you lose sight of, what's actually the most important thing. Um, but all those leadership muscles that you built at Meta, how does that translate into being CPO at Vercel, and um, what's the
Yeah.
company doing?
Yeah, there are quite a few parallels. I think one of the biggest things is all the like management fundamentals. I was very fortunate to transition into management at Facebook. We had the best management training programs, and like we had all of this stuff that I learn and I use in my day to day all the time. Situational leadership and strengths based management and all the fundamentals I think are still relevant, and they will be forever. I said, I often joke about like opening a coffee shop someday just because I want to use my management principles to lead a team at a coffee shop, and most of them would apply. I think that a lot about this role is very, very different, though, and my scope is much wider. I love that I get to kind of continue my life's work. It's still in the framework space, it's still the same ecosystem, the same community. And it's very different in terms of anchoring myself to the success of customers. So I get to learn about go to market and I get to learn about the business side of things. Um, but in terms of sort of like management principles, Vercel is a different company and operates at a different wavelength. I think in the early days of Facebook, we used to say move fast and break things. Eventually, it transitioned to move fast on stable infrastructure. I think Vercel cares about having really stable infrastructure, but also moving dramatically faster than any company I've ever seen. So all the things about like performance management and planning and all these things that used to be on like a 6 month cycle, it's all compressed. And this, obviously is 2025 versus 2009. But we move incredibly fast, and that means that a lot of things about the way that the company operates are just different. At big companies, you have these layers of approvals in order to ship things. At Vercel, we have this principle, which is you can just ship things as long as you tell the company about it first. And so we built all of these little programs and I don't call them processes because we have very little process. But we have all of these like programs that allow you to inform the company of what you want to ship, and then you can just ship things. So it's definitely the leadership muscles and the people management muscles, I think, are overlap, but they're in a completely different environment where we do things at just a different velocity, dramatically different.
We'll be back to the episode in a second, but first, I'd like to acknowledge the team behind the channel, This.Labs. We're seeing 3x to 5x productivity improvements with our teams and clients using tools like Cursor, Claude Code, and GitHub Copilot. We help teams adopt these technologies and get max value out of them through strategic partnerships, trainings, and other software engineering services. Check us out at ai.this.co. Thanks, now back to the video.
That's fun. It reminds me of, Netflix is very well known for sort of doing things a little bit differently, right? There's been books written about that type of stuff, but it sounds like at Vercel, you guys are basically building the same thing, right? Like you're just doing things so differently at such a fast pace. So I can't wait to see when your book comes out, 2, 3 years later, whenever. Um,
We do use a lot of innovation tokens at Vercel, and so some of those will become the best practices.
yeah.
It's cool when we acknowledge that we're doing something slightly differently than it would be done elsewhere, including like how we measure our success and like the OKR process from the past. It's just very different at Vercel.
Yeah, I love that. It's probably hard for a lot of people to keep up with too, right? You have to have like the right personality, because I mean, I've definitely hired a lot of managers in my lifetime, and it's like which ones are going to keep up with the sort of new, and which ones are going to get stuck in the process, and then as you grow, it's like okay, at a certain level of company, then do you want that process? What does that process look like? What's the good process that's being introduced? What's not? Sounds like you guys call them programs there. So that's that's awesome.
Minimum viable process.
I love that. So a lot of leaders measure their success in terms of revenue or growth, of course. A lot of times in the worlds that you've been in, right, success often shows up as, community adoption, let's say, right? And ideas that change the way we all build, right? The impact that we're able to have. How do you think about measuring your own impact?
Yeah, I think, influence is one, and we do track a bunch of like guardrail metrics around things like adoption, like ensuring that the things that we're building are still relevant and people still use them and want them. But I actually like to marry the analytical and the anecdotal together in a like healthy balance. You actually can't have too much of one or the other because the data doesn't tell the whole story and the anecdotes don't tell the whole story. You might have a vocal set of folks that overwhelm the rest of the sentiment. So you need to really dig deep on getting the sort of how are people feeling, are they achieving good outcomes? So we measure a bunch of things, metrics we care about for not just obviously there's the open source piece and the frameworks and things, but our kind of commercial offerings as well. We measure adoption of things and we measure sentiment of those things. But we also just spend a lot of time talking to customers directly and just understanding what's working well, what's not working, and then we feed that back into how we do things. So I like to, again, anchor the team to your success is predicated on the success of our customers. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. You can't say, oh, the test suite passes, so reward ourselves, pat on the back. It's like, well, what great outcomes were achieved for a customer or for humanity as a consequence of the work that you did? Not like, it was performative. Look, we built a thing and it sits in a repo somewhere. So I'm really always anchored to stories from customers and, they're doubling down on using our products and services. And then we'll have like these sort of indicator metrics around things like adoption and scale and downloads and all this other stuff. But we don't focus on trying to drive those things. Those are trailing indicators for us.
So I don't know, would you consider Vercel a startup anymore? Or it's kind of, when do you not become a startup?
Yeah, I think, you could call us a scale up if you wanted to at this point, but we certainly operate like a startup. We move incredibly fast. We are spinning up kind of net new things all the time, but we do have a core business that serves the like flywheel of innovation. So we have the existing products and services that fund our investment in open source and fund net new investments. And that flywheel goes very, very fast, which I think usually only happens at startups.
Yeah.
So I still call us a startup. We still operate like a startup. And it's company's been around for about 10 years. So
Yeah. Yeah.
when do you have to stop calling it a startup?
Like when you say mid-market, like define mid-market. Is that 500 million? Is that 50 million? Is that 10 million? It
Exactly.
just depends on who you talk to, right?
Yep.
So many leaders I talk to, they're like, I'm looking for something smaller, like, under 500 million. Okay,
Smaller.
smaller. Yeah, exactly. So in your role, do you see your role as guiding technology or guiding people who then guide technology?
Yeah, this is a really good question. I think for me, I have always been the person who guides the people who then guide the technology. I'm not an ideas guy.
Mhm.
I have one idea once in a while, but I'm like more of a product marketer than I am a sort of like product ideas person. So me personally, I see myself as guiding people. An anecdote I like to share on this is like, in the early days of React Native, we had just started using like NPM package management in general for like the first time, but we really weren't using it in a big way at the company. But an engineer came to me and he was like, "Hey, I'd like to build an NPM replacement." And I'm like, we barely use NPM. Like, why would I want to build an? How am I going to justify this to the business? But then we came up with a viable strategy for being able to basically justify investing in an NPM alternative, and that was Yarn at the time. And our justification was, well, we need to have hermetic builds. We need to have repeatable builds. We need lock files. Also, we think we can make this small process faster. It doesn't affect that many engineers, but like we think we can make it faster. We're just going to explore it. That turned into a big thing. I would never have had the idea like we should build an NPM replacement. But I supported an engineer who was really passionate about the space, and therefore we ended up inflecting technology in a certain direction. NPM became fast and amazing after that. PNPM came on the scene, and there's a bunch of other alternative package managers. But I've done this forever. React is not my idea. I named it, but it was definitely not my idea.
Mhm.
And nor was React Native, nor was Jest, any of the technologies that my team was responsible for. Um, so I support people. On the other hand, our CEO, Guillermo, is an ideas guy, and he's a technologist, and he's deeply technical, like dramatically more technical than me. And so he's got all of these incredible ideas, and I think the counterbalance that we have there is I'm partially responsible for helping, create a team that can execute on this vision. So, I'm the people guy, but I work really, really well with the technologists.
Yes, yes, yes. I feel like you and I are very similar, right? Like, Rob on my team is always like, "What's the vision? What's the this? What's the that?" But he's like a very ideas guy type person, right? So he has all these like opinions, and I work really well in molding and melding those things and bringing those things together. So I think it's so important though in leadership to really understand who you are, what you bring to the table, and then maximize on your strengths. So I love that. Um, so leadership philosophy. Is there sort of like one principle of leadership or a set of leadership principles that you try to embody every day?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned earlier strengths-based management. I think this
Mm-hmm.
is big for me. I really try to, and perhaps, Facebook was maybe over-indexed on this, but I really try to identify what somebody is uniquely passionate about or good at, and then find a way to enable them to focus most of their time doing that thing that they're really good at and take their like weaknesses off the table. I think traditional management way, way back in the day was more anchored on this idea that like in order to create a really incredible employee, the way to do that is actually to like round everybody out. So you're good at this and this, but you're bad at this and this. So I'm going to spend all my time focusing on these things that you're not good at in order to make you stronger. And that's just terrible. Instead, you want to complement people with others who have the complementary set of skills.
Mm, yeah.
So, this I think is number one for me is strength-based management. Another one though, I think is like this idea that you should always try to give more than you take because it's you see like a lot of people trying to take credit for things and taking credit for other people's work and all this other stuff, but in general, I think what's really helpful is that you give credit however you can, and it will accrue back to you because the people that you're giving credit, they will be appreciative, etc. So I'd love to live in a world where like everybody kind of looks out for the work of everybody else rather than looking out for themselves. We're kind of not always built that way, but it's pithy. I say give more than you take. It's a
Hmm.
thing that
Yeah.
I've
I
done.
mean, I love that. I mean, just in, I think different engineers, different people, right? I mean, mostly you and I work with engineers, so different engineers often come and, we have a pretty good culture here at this dot, and it's always like, okay, it's safe, like it's okay, and this idea sharing, but it does take a while for people to sort of uh, adopt that culture, right? Or adopt that sort of like healthy, probably healthy culture is what I'm really talking about. So that's really cool that you do that. Um, so you talked a little bit about this, right? This idea that when millions of developers are being effective and millions of developers are watching, you're really anchoring the team in terms of like focusing on the customer specifically, right? You're in the same position at Vercel. I feel like when you all do something, everybody's watching um, your team. I mean, this impacts everybody, right? Like, how do you create that sort of like safety and confidence in your team? Is it really just saying like, let's just focus on the customer, or does your team not have this problem?
No, I think every team has this problem, right? I think the thing that's most important is just like open and transparent communication. I think people make better decisions when they have the information they need to make those decisions. People build better products when they have all the context they need in order to like, get the right product to market. Um, Making sure that it's okay to make mistakes. We actually around here, we have this policy of like, incidents are okay as long as they're novel. We
Mhm.
learn from them and we harden and refine and improve our systems as a result. Non-novel incidents are annoying. And so if you end up like, if the same system keeps breaking over and over again, regardless of who is responsible for that system breaking, like it's on all of us to make it so that that system can't break. So we're learning and we're making the system better and we're improving the products. And I think safety and confidence comes from it's okay to make mistakes and to help the collective and learn from them. And you have a team of people who like want you to be successful, because then we all kind of band together. So I think with releases, with rolling out new infrastructure to millions of developers, et cetera, it's always possible to make mistakes, and the stakes can feel like they're really high. But if you're honest and open and transparent about what you're doing, and the like degree of confidence you have in what you're building, right? So this is experimental, or this is in beta, we're getting close, or this is generally available because we have confidence we're using this at scale. I think those things all kind of help. So we've built these kind of gates for folks to build up their own confidence in what they're building going forward. With rollouts, we try to roll everything out incrementally and make sure that we're not, putting out to everyone something that hasn't been vetted. I used to have a principle about open source, which is we only open source things at Facebook that we were ourselves using and depending on in production at scale. Not everybody liked this because one of the things that a lot of developers like to do is put something out there early and collect feedback and like, am I on the right track? So you kind of have to balance this with, I want to collect early feedback and see if anybody else is solving the same problem in real time. But I really don't like to put out software or technology that I'm not confident is going to be here. I take it very seriously if somebody starts to depend on our thing. And so, we really try to develop our own conviction and confidence during the rollout process.
Yeah, I love that. And this conversation has definitely been fun because I think even again going back to like 2015 or the past 10 years that I've been in web dev, I feel like I've always been about inclusivity, and talking to you is so fun because I feel like when people look at Vercel, Next, they look at React, they think, oh my gosh, this is what I use in my day to day, this is so cool, but just being able to understand that it's just people.
Just people. Everything is made up by people. It's just people.
Yeah, and I think that makes it and it's inspiring because everybody can do it, right?
Yeah, we
Um,
say everybody can cook.
yeah, yeah, exactly. I feel like that's a very Vercel term.
Yeah.
I see it on Twitter now. I keep seeing like cooking, cooking, cooking. I'm like, okay. And it's funny how like one little phrase will sort of like ripple through the community. Um,
Absolutely.
if you look at the next 10 years, so that's going to bring us to 2035 of the web, what do you hope your leadership legacy is in that story?
This is a good one. Um, I was at Facebook at a time when I watched the entire industry and our engineering organization transition from developing for the open web to proprietary kind of like closed mobile platforms. And when our engineering organization sort of split itself in two and organized around iOS and Android, I think, everything got worse, just dramatically worse.
Mhm.
We moved way slower. So we used to be able to ship a feature in a week, and then after the shift to mobile, it took 2 months to ship the same feature. So we slowed down by basically an order of magnitude. The other thing was like factions formed. It was like the framework wars, but way worse. It was like, we're building the same frameworks, but in two different programming languages for two different platforms so that we can build apps that we then go to two different gatekeepers and say, like, is it good enough? Can we release our software to the world? And if I imagine the next 10 years of the web, I think that one of the things that React did internally at Facebook and then subsequently I think did for the rest of the industry was it made web development fun like it used to be, and it made it so that we wanted to invest in web experiences and we wanted our mobile experiences to maybe complement those web experiences. But there was just this resurgence in the web, and then frameworks like Next and Gatsby and a bunch of other frameworks came on that wrapped React and turned it into an actual framework. And it made web development fun, and it became this like, my gosh, like I can build anything anywhere without needing a license and without needing to download gigabytes of code. Like I can just build again, like like it was supposed to be. So I believe that the web is the most important platform of all time. And I hope that as we look back 10 years from now, we will say that React and the team that we built around React played a really important part in ensuring that the web stays relevant for forever. I know that it's exciting when new technologies come on the scene and we have glasses and headsets and phones and all these other things to say, well, I want to build software for that device. But if every time we have new devices, we have to invent new platforms and rebuild everything and rethink everything from scratch, and they're closed and they're proprietary, I think that's worse for the world. So I hope that Vercel will play a small part in ensuring that the web wins as the most important platform of all time, and that in 10 years we will sort of thank React, frameworks like Next.js, and companies like Vercel for propelling the web forward and ensuring that it doesn't become obsoleted by proprietary closed platforms.
I love that. So, if people want to learn more about you, where can they find you?
You can find me on X / Tom Occhino. I don't really post all that much, but I should post more. But yeah, you can find me on there. My website, tomocchino.com, is a static HTML file with some links to my socials. But yeah, definitely hit me up on X, and see you on the internet.
Amazing. And you all have conferences coming up too, correct?
We do, yeah. October 22nd and 23rd. We have Next.js Conf on the 22nd, followed the next day at the same venue by Ship.ai. I'm really excited to be able, we didn't want to overload at Next.js Conf with AI, but we have so much stuff to talk about with AI, so we were just like, let's just do 2 days. I love these conferences, not just because of the content. I think the keynotes and panels and all these things are awesome, but I actually really love the volume of customers and partners and community members we get to talk to. So really excited for those. Nextjs.org/conf and vercel.com/ship-ai.
Nice. Amazing. Well, thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see you all next time.